boomsticks, hand cannons, lead-based bear spray, whatever your preferred term. In the right hands, an intelligently selected firearm cartridge combo is an unquestionable asset in bear country. That is particularly true in brown bear country. But while the internet's gossips have been twisting their heads in knots trying to divine the, quote, best caliber for bear defense, they've in fact been making a lot of really stupid suggestions.
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again!
Today, with the help of actual data and actual experts, we are going to identify everything that makes a good self-defense handgun caliber when in bear country. And we're going to do it by tackling the internet's dumb, dumber, and dumbest bear defense suggestions. If you watch only one video on this topic, this should be it. On that note,
Want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
with all due respect to Loy, his face horn is not the most annoying sound in the world. That dishonor belongs to people who spread misinformation for a living, who, thanks to the internet's upside-down meritocracy, are making a killing, pun intended. Now listen, it's not my goal to be overly negative, but we're dealing with matters of human safety. Your safety. Do you really want somebody who's going to coddle you? Or would you prefer someone who just says it how it is?
Just give it to me straight.
I have personally encountered innumerable grizzlies, interviewed attack survivors, and worked with biologists and grizzly management teams to produce the Cut the Crap Guide to Bear Safety. And unlike other channels which use stock footage, I personally captured almost every second of bear footage you will see here today. And as I have listened to the internet blab on endlessly about self-defense in grizzly country, it has become agonizingly clear that very, very few people actually know what they're talking about. Case in point, conventional wisdom might suggest that if you're looking for a good bear defense handgun, you should consult hunters, guides, and gun experts, right?
What?
Now don't get me wrong, there are certainly some informed voices among these groups, but they're not informed because they're hunters, guides, or gun enthusiasts. They're informed because they follow the fundamentals, not the crowd. In truth, wisdom is rarely conventional, and dumb advice doesn't magically become intelligent because of a person's profession or level of, quote, experience, as you are about to see. Quick pause. If you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications for instant access to the best outdoor resources found anywhere. And if you're sick of the internet's profit for misinformation economy and want to do something about it, then click thanks below this video or join the Wild Spaces team here on YouTube or over on Patreon, where you will get exclusive access to the expert interviews referenced on my channel. Backcountry safety, like anything of real importance, isn't like voting for the high school prom queen. When you head into grizzly country, you don't want popular information. You want reliable information.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
Why then do people commonly confuse the two? Well, it's because we're humans and social creatures by nature, which means social proof, aka the popularity trap, snags all of us from time to time. However, if you can go into your brain and flip the switch from follow the crowd to follow the fundamentals, you'll be in fantastic shape, and not just in the backcountry, but in life. Second to following the crowd comes the experience fallacy, which looks something like this. Generic gun tuber invites person X who has lived or guided in Alaska for Y number of years to share what he, she, or they carry or have to say about defending yourself in brown bear country. While this approach has produced some insightful commentaries, more often than not, the result is a haphazard patchwork of gossip and dangerous BS. Now clearly, relevant experience is a valuable asset, but like any virtue, experience can also quickly become a vice, especially if you fail to recognize that your anecdotal experience is not as relevant as you believe it is, or is not representative of broader facts, truths, and realities. Now we're going to discuss a few examples in just a minute, but before we do that, we need to identify the characteristics which differentiate an intelligent defensive handgun cartridge from a dumb defensive handgun cartridge when in brown bear country. It's time to get real. Alaska Game & Fish lists only 2 firearms, which they suggest are appropriate if circumstances justify putting down a brown bear. A 12-gauge shotgun with rifle slugs or a 300 Magnum rifle. Furthermore, they explicitly warn that even powerful handguns may not be sufficient in emergency situations, particularly in untrained hands.
Ooh.
So if handguns aren't ideal, then why do so many people carry or recommend a handgun for self-defense in brown bear country? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Compared with rifles, handguns are much easier to carry and better lend themselves to rapid close quarters deployment, which has obvious benefits when you consider that most grizzly attacks occur with little or no warning. But there is more to this equation. As stated, handguns cannot compete with high-powered rifles, but that doesn't change the fact that you want a caliber that can impart maximum deterring force on target while simultaneously penetrating deeply through hide, bones, muscle, and organs. Inland brown bears can weigh over 700 pounds, and along the Alaska coast, they can weigh twice that much. And when the moment of truth arrives, you can't discourage aggression with your fists or goodwill. Just ask Timothy Treadwell. You need a deterrent that can overcome your embarrassing physical disadvantages. I'm sure somebody is going to mention the supposed case where somebody put down a brown bear with a .22 caliber revolver. Even if true, no intelligent person is going to try and or suggest you try to replicate that result. I could cite at least a few stories of someone fighting off a grizzly with a pocket knife, but that doesn't mean that I am ever going to advise you to rely on your Leatherman to protect yourself in grizzly country. So going forward, I am going to assume that not even Lloyd and Harry would be dumb enough to consider something like a .22 as an intelligent caliber selection for grizzly bear defense. Though that hasn't stopped the internet from making similar suggestions. Most people who love guns love them because of the power rush that they get when firing them. Don't try and deny it, we all know it's true. The fireball, the recoil, targets exploding downrange. It's a power rush. And the experience is so potent for so many people that you can literally watch the dopamine hit in real time, especially when they're shooting a big old hand cannon. And you know what? These tools do bestow power on people who know how and when to use them properly and responsibly. But in unqualified hands, that same power is an unqualified liability for everyone. Too much dopamine can overwhelm reason, resulting in overconfidence and poor decision making.
You talking to me?
Such as selecting a gun cartridge combo that is too weak, too powerful, too expensive, or too boutique or glam to be mastered. Which brings us to the final of our 4 criteria. People routinely underestimate the level of skill needed to reliably deploy a handgun when facing off with an aggressive grizzly. The very best data currently available suggests that close quarters defensive engagements between gun users and bears result in human injuries roughly 50% of the time. We're talking about a very high level of proficiency. This is not your shooting range activity here. This is not shooting at paper targets or even still targets. This is dynamic shooting, intuitive shooting. Very different than shooting at a range, much more difficult to master. Being backcountry proficient with a firearm means firing thousands of rounds and a significant investment in both time and money. That means education, quality training, meaningful practice, more education, more training, more meaningful practice, and yes, more education, training, and practice. It also means studying bears, their behavior, and the circumstances that justify the use of deadly force. Otherwise, that big iron on your hip isn't just an expensive security blanket, it's a liability. Selecting a handgun cartridge for personal defense that is prohibitively expensive or difficult to find in sufficient quantities will render meaningful training and mastery of your defensive tool an impossibility. You want to select a dependable, prevalent caliber that can be reliably cycled in a quality firearm. So now that we've set the criteria, let's discuss some of the dumbest cartridges suggested by the internet for self-defense in brown bear country. With the proviso that even dumb cartridges in highly skilled or more likely lucky hands may still get the job done. My exposure to the .38 came years ago when firing my grandfather's old police-issued service revolvers. Though an adequate, if not ideal cartridge for engaging urban threats, as a bear defense round, the .38 is a really dumb choice. If you've engaged with this subject for long, you've almost certainly come across some gun tuber or commentator discussing a series of articles written by Dean Weingarten for Ammmoland.com. For the informed reader, Dean's efforts are very insightful, but for the uninformed reader, they're a veritable minefield of hazardous suppositions and sloppy generalizations, which, thanks to the internet, have now spawned thousands of really stupid bear defense suggestions. This is illustrated clearly by Weingarten's compilation of 5 human bear conflicts in which a .38 caliber revolver was fired. The first point that we need to discuss is that a tiny dataset of 5 incidents is completely incapable of supporting the notion of a .38 or like cartridge as a reliable bear defense option. Furthermore, Dean Weingarten's own records betray the .38's profound weaknesses as a bear defense round. In one of only 2 cases compiled by Dean involving brown bears, a mother grizzly was shot twice in the side of the head with a .38 caliber revolver at close range, but continued walking slowly past the shooter, quote, acting as if she did not notice him. The shooter then reportedly shot the bear a 3rd time at 25 yards. It's claimed that she then rolled down the hill. First of all, this was not an attack. This was a proximity shooting, making its inclusion in Ammmoland's Guns as Bear Defense catalog questionable. The other, thus far unspoken fact that we need to discuss is that any cartridge which fails to drop a non-aggressive grizzly after multiple headshots should not be considered a relevant self-defense cartridge in brown bear country. In fact, the only successful case documented by Weingarten of a .38 caliber revolver halting a grizzly attack involved 2 hunters, one of which shot a small mother grizzly 3 times at a distance of 6 feet or less while she was attacking his companion. The bear died in the exchange, but rather than an endorsement of the .38 as a grizzly defense cartridge, the story better highlights the importance of traveling with companions. That is the dominant theme unifying innumerable bear attack stories, including an event seemingly ignored by Ammmoland's Handguns as Bear Defense reporting. Early September 2023, Rudy Norlander was helping a father-son duo locate a deer that they had shot the night before. Fanning out to cover more area, Rudy stepped over a log and encountered an extremely large grizzly boar, which charged him. Lifting his .38 caliber revolver, he pulled the trigger, but it misfired. During the subsequent struggle, Rudy punched the bear in the nose. The bear responded by ripping off a large portion of his lower jaw. The father and son then rushed to Rudy's aid and successfully chased the bear away by yelling and throwing rocks. But Rudy's story is likewise less an endorsement of throwing rocks than it is a reminder to master your deterrence and travel with responsible companions. Those events involving black bears likewise give a mixed impression of the .38 as a reliable self-defense round in black bear country. During the one encounter deemed a failure by Weingarten, the involved party fired his gun 5 times while taking refuge in a tree, but the mother black bear didn't leave until after he put his gun away and continued yelling. Now, .38 caliber pistols are easy to carry. They're abundant, they're affordable, but they fall embarrassingly short of the power and penetrative capabilities of far more advisable bear defense cartridges. That is why I have listed the .38 as a dumb defensive caliber in brown bear country and a thoroughly questionable choice in black bear country. It seems only logical to now pivot to the .38's big brother, the .357 Magnum. This caliber has long been synonymous with backcountry defense. Dean Weingarten has documented 14 cases, one which he considers a failure and another he considers, quote, indeterminable. But looking at his data further, 4 incidents involved what are better termed nuisance bears, and several individuals who confronted aggressive bears incurred serious injuries. When in proficient and responsible hands, the .357 Magnum is a viable defensive tool when in grizzly country. But I've chosen to include it on my list of dumb calibers because in my estimation, the .357 Magnum has been thoroughly eclipsed by the 10mm. A heavy .357 Magnum round maintains a very slight edge over the 10mm in both power and penetrative capabilities. But with the exception of only a few single-stack semi-auto pistols of suspect reliability, the .357 Magnum is limited to 8, 7, 6, and 5-shot revolvers, where 10mm semi-auto pistols with double-stacked magazines regularly carry 15 rounds or more. And despite countless ignorant claims to the contrary, those extra rounds are often a deciding factor. With practice, it is possible to reload a double-action revolver relatively quickly, but that process requires shuffling your strong and support hands and taking your eyes off the threat. With an abundance of high-quality double-stacked semi-auto pistols chambered in 10mm, it is impossible for me to recommend the .357 Magnum as a defensive cartridge in brown bear country unless you do not have access to a better option. And to those of you claiming that revolvers are, quote, more reliable, I'm sorry to say that the internet has lied to you. I'm going to go over the revolver reliability myth in a future video, so make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. All right, it's time to talk about Phil Shoemaker. You mean that guy who directed that terrible Batman and Robin movie? No, that's Joel Schumacher. Phil Shoemaker is the guy who in 2016 shot and killed an 800-pound coastal grizzly with a 9mm pistol. I've discussed Phil's experience in detail in my Guns vs. Bear Spray video, so I'm not going to rehash the whole thing here. But the Cliff Note version is as follows. Phil got lucky. The bear charged his clients, not him, generously giving him abundant time to react and shoot an effectively stationary target, which never identified Phil as a threat and thus made no attempt to harm him. The bear was, however, clearly a threat to Phil's clients, so he was justified in taking lethal action. Phil's story is a prime example of a justified proximity shooting and is included in Ammmoland's bear defense catalog, along with 4 other incidents where 9mm pistols were used to deal with brown or grizzly bears. But one of those incidents involved a captive circus bear, a situation which translates exceedingly poorly to dealing with bears in the wild. Another incident involved 2 hunters firing both warning shots and bear spray. The bear spray extended approximately 10 feet and did not reach the grizzly. Warning shots also failed. The hunters subsequently began firing their 9mm pistols in unison, at which point the bear ran off. It's reportedly unknown how many shots were fired, probably a great many, before the bear left. And it's likewise unknown if any of those rounds struck the bear. By fixating on what caliber was used, Dean Weingarten continually neglects most of the primary morals of the stories that he has documented, like traveling with companions, layering your defense, and leaving your dog at home. Returning to Phil Shoemaker, to whom I bear no ill will, Weingarten, like innumerable commentators, fails to acknowledge the dominant role that pure luck played in Shoemaker's experience. He straight up gambled his and his client's safety on a grossly underpowered single-stack 9mm pistol, a fact that makes the internet's tortured mutation of his story into some kind of John Wick Goes Grizzly piece of BS fan fiction particularly troubling. Following the social media hysteria, many Alaskans, guides, gun tubers, and hunters began recommending 9mm pistols for grizzly bear defense, performing tests that, while not that dissimilar to Phil's experience, bear absolutely no resemblance to an actual bear charge or attack. Phil's 30-plus years as a hunting and fishing guide and his luck do not magically transform a dumb decision into a smart decision. Was Phil's 9mm pistol better than no defense at all? Of course it was. But that's roughly the equivalent of showing up to fight in the Colosseum armed with a Swiss Army knife, only to argue, well, it's better than nothing. I suspect that Phil, like many, many others, fell prey to one of the internet's marketing schemes. Buffalo bore ammunition had previously sent Phil some of its overpriced, overhyped ammo. Phil then tested that ammunition on stationary targets with his 9mm and apparently concluded it would be sufficient. So while I am grateful that neither Phil or his clients were injured, it does trouble me that Buffalo Bore went on to reap a windfall of thoroughly undeserved free advertising, and that the internet, using Phil's story, went to work making people dumber and less safe. Speaking of Buffalo Bore, the owner has repeatedly advised people to go with the 45 ACP over the 10mm in the backcountry, arguing that the 45, quote, makes a bigger hole. So if you're measuring bullet wounds only along the X and Y axes, then I suppose that's marginally true. But if you're thinking in 3 dimensions, like you should, while also considering the amount of force delivered on target, then the 45 ACP over 10mm argument falls apart faster than a graham cracker that's been soaking in rotten milk. Moving away from the arguments made by Tim Sundles to real-world events, and the 45 ACP argument only disintegrates further. Can the 45 ACP plus P or otherwise get the job done? Of course. We saw that last year when 2 young bow hunters worked together to defend themselves against a 530-pound grizzly. But that bear was shot 24 times, first charging through 3 rounds of 10mm before then absorbing 18 to 19 45 ACP, quote, bear loads, which generally means hardcast plus P, perhaps Buffalo Bore's own offering. Dean Weingarten adds 3 conflicts with grizzlies to our 45 ACP dataset. No attacks, only charges. In 2 of those cases, it took 9 rounds or a whole magazine of 45 ACP to achieve the desired result. And it's unclear how many times the bear was shot in the 3rd case, which occurred in Denali National Park in 2010. Furthermore, all of these cases involved multiple people engaging the bear, strongly suggesting that the companion factor was a dominant contributor to each outcome. The point is, as a defensive round in brown bear country, the 45 ACP argument is far, far weaker than the internet and especially Buffalo Bore's owner would have you believe. Honestly, I wanted to address each and every backwards argument in hopes of warning you against taking advice from what I call Mother Goose influencers, who sit and spin fairy tale narratives, often contradicting themselves. But honestly, I just couldn't keep things condensed enough for this video. So let me know in the comments if that's a topic you would like me to address in the future. What does need to be said here and now, at least relating to the topic of self-defense in bear country, is that one's experience as the owner of an ammunition company or, quote, killing thousands of animals for sport isn't just irrelevant. In the case of Buffalo Bore's owner, it's a massive liability. A hunter shooting a stationary animal in profile, most often from a concealed and supported position, where you can choose your shot and carefully control your breathing because you're not facing an immediate threat to your life, is totally divorced from halting a charging or attacking bear which is intent on eliminating you. You are going to see a bunch of really misleading tests where influencers use beef scapulas, wood planks, or ceramic tiles to try and approximate a bear's skull, each apparently ignorant of the fact that far more powerful and deeply penetrating calibers, like the .454 Casull, have, quote, creased a bear's skull and failed to penetrate. Quite possibly because of ammunition choices, but more likely because of a concept known as the angle of deflection. These same sterile tests universally neglect the fact that almost no one actually hits a charging bear between the eyes or ears on their first shot, because that is an extremely difficult target to hit, even for extremely proficient shooters. If it wasn't already clear, I do not advise the 45 ACP as a defensive cartridge in brown bear country. In black bear country, meh. Just know that when compared with brown bears, you are 38 times more likely to deter a black bear with a firearm. Obviously, the choice of what you choose to carry is yours to make. Just make sure that you have good information. The amount of dangerous BS being shared on the internet is unbelievable. Making intelligent decisions relating to your safety requires quality information, and that is exactly what you get here on At Home and Wild Spaces. Without moving on to more novelty calibers and firearms, the 10mm is currently the most powerful production semi-automatic handgun cartridge available, far outperforming the 45 ACP in all metrics save cost. The 10mm is also an internet darling right now, but I want to caution you, it is not a genie in a bottle. And as we've discussed, the power limitations of handgun cartridges necessitate a very high level of proficiency, especially if you want to reliably end aggression by brown bears. So some of you have asked me about the 45 Super rather than a 45 ACP. 45 Super rounds definitely narrow the power gap with the 10mm. But it is very important that your firearm can safely and reliably cycle hotter 45 loads. And you need to use some really hot stuff to make the 45 competitive with the 10mm. You also have novelty cartridges like the 460 Roland or the 45 Win Mag, both of which are similar in ballistic performance to a low to mid-tier 44 Magnum. However, neither is broadly available, nor are there production firearms chambered in these novelty calibers. You can buy an out-of-production LAR Grizzly or a 460 Roland conversion kit for popular semi-autos, but anytime that you start adding third-party parts into a precisely engineered piece of machinery, malfunction concerns jump significantly. If you feel that you have found a quality 460 Roland or 45 Win Mag bullet firearm combo, then more power to you. See what I did there? More power, right? But given the many variables and limited availability, I cannot in good conscience advise you go with the 460 Roland or the 45 Win Mag. I would argue that the 10mm is the defensive floor for brown bear country, and then only if you are highly proficient. There are some Hollywood semi-auto handguns like the Desert Eagle that are chambered in 44 Magnum, 429 DE, and 50 Action Express. But the Desert Eagle is an overpriced, unreliable, impractical glam gun with a really stupid slide design that makes proper support hand placement all but impossible. Honestly, the Desert Eagle only makes sense if you're plugged into the Matrix, a LARPer, or you feel the need to find a handgun to match your earring and handbag ensemble. In the real world, the Deagle is a really dumb choice for self-defense, especially in brown bear country. When it comes to raw power and deep penetration, big bore revolvers are and probably always will be king. The 44 Magnum is essentially the poster child for self-defense in brown bear country. It is also the only handgun caliber with a sufficient defensive data set to draw any concrete conclusions. Ironically, Dean Weingarten has also compiled exactly 44 cases where 44 Magnum handguns were fired during human-bear conflicts. Many of these cases involve nuisance bears, but the clear majority are defensive scenarios. Now, several of those cases resulted in significant human injuries, but as handgun cartridges go, the 44 Magnum may be one of the best defensive calibers available. But be forewarned, like the Desert Eagle, the 44 Magnum also suffers from internet and movie land mythology. There are professional shooters that have not been able to tame the 44 Magnum. So the life and death question becomes, how well can you deploy something in a self-defense scenario that you can't master at the range? Mike Harrington, bear safety specialist with Alaska Fish and Game, and the chief firearm instructor for his department, put it this way.
We have the 44 revolvers, and we shot the 340 P&P rounds out of those, and I almost break my wrist. They're too powerful. I can't handle the firearm after one shot. So, we dropped down to like 305 rounds. So, like anything, you've got to be able to control that gun, work it properly, aim it properly, and get those rounds off in time. And they may or may not stop that bear because they're such a tough, powerful, fast animal. Their head is designed to deflect bullets and everything.
So because the 44 Magnum is already too much gun for most people to master, and that includes many people who think they've mastered it, I'm going to group the 454, 460, 475, 480, 500, and even 4570 cartridges all together. And yes, there are production revolvers that fire these monsters. Firing some of these calibers, especially max loads from a handgun, is kind of like holding a dragon by the tail. Which is why the internet loves them so much. They're great for clickbait and the odd come to Jesus moment. Dean Weingarten has compiled scarce examples of these hand cannon calibers being used to deal with aggressive bears. So there's not much that we can say other than they certainly can get the job done. But beyond controllability, there is something you need to know about these big bore calibers. The big bore capacity ceiling is 6 rounds. And revolvers chambered in 460, 480, 500, or like calibers are limited to 5 rounds. So while a hit on target with one of these incredibly powerful cartridges can go a long way to ending aggression, missed shots or unsuccessful warning shots become a lot more consequential when you've only got 5 or 6 rounds in the cylinder. Beyond capacity concerns, big bore revolvers and the ammunition required to master them are often prohibitively expensive. That is especially true with boutique calibers like the 475 or 500 Linebaugh, which are stupid expensive. I'm talking $4 or more a round stupid, and they can be very difficult to find. Well, that is unless you're shilling overpriced and overhyped ammo for a living. There is, of course, also reloading yourself, but that's a whole other conversation. So even if you could tame the insane recoil of some of these cartridges, could you even afford the materials necessary to master one of these hand cannons? It is a critical question that everybody needs to answer for themselves. So, are big bore revolvers a dumb choice for personal defense in brown bear country? They certainly can be. Honestly, I don't think I've ever seen somebody master max loads for any of these big bore revolvers. Ever. Selecting the very best bear gun caliber means balancing the tension between power and controllability, while also considering logistical concerns like price, availability, and reliability. It's a balancing act, and it will vary significantly from person to person. Mike Harrington of Alaska Fish and Game put it this way.
I would definitely go as big as you can and as powerful as you can to help stop these bears. You just never know where those rounds are going to hit, and you definitely want a powerful round that you can handle.
But being backcountry proficient isn't measured solely by your ability to deploy your deterrent. It means knowing your own limits and the limitations of the tools you carry. It also means understanding bears, their behavior, and how to prevent conflicts and guard against dangerous BS. Which brings us back to these guys.
I have some friends in Alaska that are flying out the bodies. That's their PJs. They work for the Air Force, and when they're off season, they're working for the state when they're stationed in Alaska, and they say that the bear spray is working about 50% of the time.
All right.
This is how BS works. It's melodramatic, it's sensational, and it preys on your fears. Well, that are your biases. The problem here is that none of these clucking hens provides any verifiable data. We're just expected to believe these claims because one of these guys lives and hunts in Alaska. So I decided to test this claim properly so that you don't have to fall for this crap. Special thanks to Riley Woodward from Alaska Fish and Game for providing actual figures. First of all, if you take a minute and think about what this guy just said, his statement debunks itself. If his friends are, as he claims, quote, flying out the bodies, then they are flying out only corpses, which means that their anecdotal experience reflects only failures, not successes. And this is one of the problems with the data across the board. No one save God Almighty is witnessing every use of bear spray or a firearm in a defensive scenario. I am the first to admit that the data that we have is not perfect, but the absolute worst data available is this kind of gossip. With the help of Alaska Fish and Game staff, I was able to uncover exactly one fatal attack which occurred in Alaska where an empty can of bear spray was located at the attack site. But in commenting on that exact attack, Mike Harrington said the following.
You know, just having an empty can of bear spray laying there, it doesn't mean that the spray hit the bear, or you just don't know the exact circumstances. We have no idea how it was used, how it got emptied. You just don't know these details. So to try to speculate on that is, it's wrong to do that.
On average, Alaska logs less than one fatal bear attack per year, with 10 fatalities in 8 separate incidents between 2000 and 2017, and an additional 7 fatal attacks between 2018 and 2024. These include Timothy Treadwell and his girlfriend Amy Huguenard, who had no deterrent, as well as Richard and Catherine Huffman, who had a firearm, but were unable to deploy it. That is the dominant trend among all serious and fatal bear attacks. A deterrent was either not present, was not used, or was used too late to prevent injury. It doesn't matter if the victim was a hunter, guide, soldier, geologist, hiker, or photographer, or if they were carrying bear spray or a firearm. The thing most likely to get you killed in brown bear country is not being able to deploy an effective deterrent in time. As discussed, sometimes guns misfire or are fired too late, or the bear charges through the bullets. When commenting on this guy's claim, Alaska Fish and Game said, "That's BS, that's BS, that's BS." Only they didn't abbreviate, and yes, they repeated themselves. Whenever someone dies in a bear attack, it's international news. This guy's friends, real or imaginary, are not flying out some unknown number of dead hikers who used bear spray. That's just garbage. And where some people get extremely lucky, others are extremely unlucky. Your absolute best defense in bear country is mastering the bear attack ABCs, which include detailed instruction on how to use both bear spray and an appropriate firearm. The right gun with the right bullets in the right hands is the only tool that can end an aggressive encounter once and for all. But if you know what you're doing, lethal force is almost never necessary. Bear spray is easy to master, it's extremely cost effective, and it is extremely effective when used properly. There is absolutely no intelligent reason to not carry and know how to use bear spray when in brown bear country. If you're going to make claims like this, then bring the receipts, because if it can't be verified, it's just a bunch of guys blabbing in a circle or clucking like some old gossipy hens.
Cheep, 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 talk a lot, speak a little more, speak a little, talk a little, speak a little, talk a little, cheep, cheep, cheep.
It is cheap, ignorant, dangerous BS, and the internet loves it. I am grateful to people like Dean Weingarten, who I believe is genuinely trying to be helpful. But if you don't have a roadmap, even Dean's work can be dangerously misleading. Again, if you have any questions, please watch my Guns vs. Bear Spray video or leave a comment below. If I can't answer your questions personally, then I will almost certainly answer them in a video. Please click subscribe and consider joining the Wild Spaces community here on YouTube or over on Patreon. Or make a one-time donation by clicking thanks below this video. Until next time, this is Mike reminding you to follow the fundamentals, not the crowd, especially when you're in brown bear country.